very recently in the Chicago area, and it's actually called the Justice Conference, and it targets millennials. And my guest was present at the two-day event, and it's another indication that things, well, they're more and more left-leaning all the time. And as a matter of fact, one of the speakers, Cornel West, he's a self-avowed socialist. He's a black radical and was featured as one of the speakers. There was apparently talk about white supremacy, white guilt, white privilege, racial injustice towards minorities, American colonialism. Of course, Christian Palestinianism was presented, and anti-Israel type sentiment. And obviously, these kinds of events, well, they weren't really featured 15, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, so the times they are a-changing. My guest for the segment is Jim Fletcher. He's an online writer and author. He writes for a variety of publications, including the Jerusalem Post, WorldNet Daily, One News Now, BeliefNet. He blogs weekly at Israel Watch. That's the column that he writes, and is part of Rapture Ready Radio as well. I'll say more about his book in just a moment. And Jim Fletcher, welcome back, and help us understand just what is this Justice Conference? Who's behind it? You were there. My listeners, I assure you, many know nothing of this.
Sure. Well, nice to be with you, Jen. The Justice Conference, I attended because when I looked at the speaker lineup, I was really kind of taken aback that they had front-loaded it with so many pro-Palestinian type religious people. The Justice Conference is really a social justice platform for what I would call progressive Christians. I think they would self-identify that way. Interestingly, it follows a similar format to the Catalyst conferences, which are also held around the country every year several times. Both of these conferences are geared toward left-leaning social justice issues. Catalyst conference, which was co-founded about 15 years ago by Andy Stanley, purports to be the leadership vessel for the evangelical church in America. Justice Conference was a bit more secular in feel. They had maybe a few more secular type speakers. The executive director, Mark Reddy, much more in that vein than some of the leaders at Catalyst. But in any event, the Justice Conference was targeting the millennial generation, the 18 to 35-year-olds. It was held in downtown Chicago at the auditorium. They packed the place. Dr. Cornel West was the keynote speaker, and of course West is really a radical who is being mainstreamed rapidly by evangelical leaders.
Well, you have quoted him, some of the things he said at this event, and here, just a few things, because you wrote about it, and you can read more about this, folks, at his website, prophecymatters.com, and there's an article there that talks more in depth about this event, which is a few weeks ago now. You say, though he repeatedly talked about love, this is Cornel West, and loving one's enemies, recalling his Baptist upbringing and the influence of his grandparents, West is in truth a radical leftist who associates with known bigots and racists, and his appearance at the Justice Conference leaves some dismayed. His growing influence with the millennial generation and its leaders, like Relevant magazine publisher Cameron Strang, is a signal that new thought has crept into the American church. So, Jim, tell me, how did this crowd, for now, let's just stick with Cornel West, and many folks have seen him on the cable channels and other places, and indeed, a true radical. How did this younger generation receive this fellow?
Wildly enthusiastic. They treated him as if he were a rock star. I believe he's about 65, teaches at Union Seminary, formerly Princeton, and yet they treated him as if he were one of their contemporaries, and his keynote on Friday night was standing room only.
Did you actually talk to any of the, I'm sure you did, any of the attendees? Did you get some feedback from the overall flavor of the event?
Yes, I did. In fact, almost universally, they were very enthusiastic about the event, about the content of the event. They don't seem to be aware of a lot of history, a lot of the implications of what people like West stand for. For example, while in his keynote he talks a great deal about love, and he talks about embracing even your enemies in this peace and reconciliation, this utopia-type world, he also calls Louis Farrakhan his dear brother. He makes allowances for the Black Panthers. Some of the worst black radical theologians he counts as friends. He has described himself as a non-Marxist socialist, and so he really does embrace radical ideology, and yet those in attendance seemed to think that he was a real peacenik.
All right, so you are quoting here, you're quoting David Horowitz, who writes about this Cornel West, and you're saying Horowitz says that he, West, was a celebrity sponsor of the 2012 Global March to Jerusalem, an attack organized by Islamist Iran on the Jewish state. He has been a frequent speaker at the Black Liberation Church of another sponsor of the Global March, Jeremiah Wright, the notorious anti-Semite and race hater, whom West regards as my dear brother and a prophetic Christian preacher. West defends the infamous Wright anathema of God blank America, explaining that it is the function of prophetic Christians like Wright to call on God to curse America, because America is no different from every nation that treats its citizens as less than human. So I think you're suggesting that some of this sentiment was presented at this Justice Conference, maybe not quite so blatant, but some of this sentiment came out.
Absolutely. In fact, what I saw at the Justice Conference was what I call the manipulation of language. It is taking concepts and words and presenting them to an audience, but your underlying meaning is different. In other words, when he talks about love, it's love in terms of changing the culture so that you can defeat white colonialism, white supremacy, those kind of things. And if conservatives don't get in line with the new thinking, then love is out the window. So, when West spoke in his keynote about white guilt, really, truly demonizing our country's history, and at the same time heavily emphasizing the redistribution of wealth, which are classic communist ideologies, the audience didn't seem to pick up on that. They're, again, a younger group, don't remember the Cold War. They don't remember some of the murderous part of the 20th century. And so the people and ideas that West embraced are truly radical, and yet the audience didn't seem to grasp that at all.
Well, their website, the Justice Conference website, says our vision is to serve the discovery of ideas, celebrate the beauty of justice, and foster a community of people who live justice together. Now more than ever, people of faith need to come together to wrestle with the injustices of our world. This is the time. This is the place. Now, apparently some other speakers included Lynn Hybels and Louis Giglio. What did Lynn Hybels present?
Well, she presented more of her nonviolent peacemaking theme, but what she's done in the last couple of years, and I've tracked her progression in this, she has moved from presentations that are blatantly anti-Israel, for example, accusing Israel of the, quote, occupation and of oppressing Palestinians, to a more balanced, nuanced view that still gets her point across, but makes her appear to be very even-handed. So she spoke about that. And by the way, Hybels, who co-founded the Willow Creek Church with her husband Bill, was an integral part of the planning of this event. Across the street from the auditorium was a student-oriented Willow Creek Church that's downtown. And so it was literally a walk across the street so that they could then have these students indoctrinated more in left-leaning causes. So Hybels is a key figure in all this, and yet again, rank-and-file evangelicals don't understand what she's all about.
Well, Jim Fletcher, and that's who I'm speaking to for this segment, and you can learn more at prophecymatters.com. What do you think she is all about, in your words? Tell me.
Lynn Hybels is about extreme left-wing ideology. She wrote an article for a Catalyst conference specifically for that, and in her own words talks about her move into mystical practices, contemplative spirituality, a rejection of the Word, and that kind of thing. But again, connected since about 2008 to presenting what I call the Palestinian narrative. Oh. She's visited Israel several times. Her view of that is very similar to the PLO, the PA, and so her position at Willow Creek allows her to really blanket the country in her talks in churches and in her writing and things like that. So, again, whether it's the Arab-Israeli conflict or whether it is discussion of what Christianity is, she's very left-wing. She's